Hi everyone, this is Jerome Nolvan, founder of GGV Publishing and your host for GGV Publishing Podcast. Today, we have the first author of GGV Publishing, Hunter Coates. Hunter, welcome to GGV Publishing Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
No problem. It's a pleasure to have you on as well. Thank you for coming. So, Hunter, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience to start with?
Yeah. So my name is Hunter Coates. I'm an undergraduate senior right now. I major in philosophy and history, double major. I go to a liberal arts university in the South, Georgia, and yeah, I'm 21. That's kind of it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I gotta say it's pretty impressive. Not many people have published a book at that age. So honestly, kudos for that. It's very impressive. Even me at your age, I didn't publish a book. I was in college, just having fun. I
Yeah.
always enjoy writing and everything, but I wasn't really dedicated to the task as you are. So honestly, this is very impressive. You published a book with us last year, Conspiracy and the Subject. So a Lacanian psychoanalysis. It's a convoluted topic, right? It is fascinating. Personally, I enjoyed reading it, working on it, but it is convoluted for the average reader. So why don't you introduce the reader to such a convoluted topic itself?
Yeah. Yeah. So, the way I would describe Lacanian psychoanalysis is that everything begins from desire. And the way we think about desire is kind of the same way that Lacanian psychoanalysis thinks about it, but it adds this like extra little thing at the end, which kind of like radically kind of changes the way that we colloquially think about desire. So, for instance, let's say I desire a cookie. So, I desire a cookie, I want a cookie. And when I get that cookie, my desire is completed. But then my desire shifts to another thing, right? Now I desire to go watch TV, right? So you can go on and on and on and on with this train of desire. But the whole point that Lacan says and that Lacanian psychoanalysis centers on is that beyond all this desire, there is a fundamental lack which can never be solved. And that lack is what propels desire. So it isn't just thinking about desire in these individual cases, but it's saying that beyond all of these individual cases of lack, there is a fundamental lack that structures desire. So it's a very it's taking a view of desire and viewing it as a structure, like a comprehensible structure.
Mhm.
And Lacan does this with a lot of different things. Um, he views cultures as structures. And this idea of viewing things as structures is very important in psychoanalysis because it allows us to then view society as a structure and relationships as a structure, which allows us to then understand these concepts and these experiences more than if we were to not view them as a comprehensible structure.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So okay, so if I clearly understand, Lacanian analysis start with the idea of desire. Like basically, desire starts from the fact that we are lacking something,
Mhm.
and it's that lack that drives us to pursue the things that we want. So would you say that the Lacanian thought applies to politics, to economics as well? Because I know in the book that you've touched on it and you're pretty well versed. It's true, you're a philosophy major, but you're well versed in politics and economics. So how the Lacanian analysis applies to those two fields?
Yeah. When it comes to politics and economics, one of the things that Lacanian psychoanalysis tends to do is look at what Lacan says is the like ever I guess what I'll say is that for Lacan, the political economy of capitalism, a privatized means of production, for him is a way that that lack is emphasized, where he would say that maybe like a future or hypothetical means of production system would not emphasize lack as much, where lack in capitalism is so emphasized because we are always striving to get the new commodity. We're always striving to put in more work hours to then make more money to then buy a new commodity. And so Lacan would say that emphasizing lack is taking away from things that matter more to us, such as enjoyment. And for him, lack is kind of opposed to enjoyment. And so he would say that a political economy that is based on emphasizing lack rather than trying to deal with lack, which she would say capitalism does not deal with lack, but it emphasizes it. He would say that that is a political economy that is not in the best interest of people.
Got it. Okay.
Mhm.
And when we stay on the idea of lack, so how would you say that lack is inherent to human nature? We always lack something. That's why we have
Yeah.
this desire. Okay, so if I understand it, it's not something that is constructed. It's not something external. It's
No.
it's part of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you could sum up the book to someone that is interested but has no idea about Lacanian
Mhm.
philosophy and psychoanalysis, in a phrase or two, how would you sum up the book
Yeah.
to such a person?
So my book is about conspiracy theories. And what I do is I take Lacan's various theories in his corpus of over 30 years
Mhm,
and take those theories and apply them to trying to understand conspiracy theories, kind of how conspiracy theories form,
mhm,
how they spread, and importantly, what is like the structure of a conspiracy theory?
mhm,
What makes people believe in conspiracy theories? What thoughts do they have in their head when they start believing in conspiracy theories?
mhm,
And one of the things I come to at the very start of the book is I lay out a definition of conspiracy that attaches to basically every conspiracy theory that you could think of.
mhm.
Um,
What is the
and so,
definition of conspiracy itself?
yeah, so I say that conspiracy is a attempt by the person to try and alleviate the deception that to try and alleviate the feeling that they are being deceived by an authority. So,
Interesting.
an easy example would be like 9/11. Um, when people think of 9/11 conspiracy theories, there's always this presupposition that the authority is deceiving. Whether the authority is the news or the government, the idea is always that, well, the authority is deceiving me, but I have looked beyond this deception to the truth. I have looked beyond this. And what I kind of go into is how the idea that the authority is always deceiving you is is positioned on the idea that the authority has complete power. For instance, with the 9/11 conspiracy theories, the fact that the Pentagon planes and various government planes did not shoot down the terrorist planes that were going into the towers in time for a 9/11 conspiracy theorist, that for them is evidence that the government was orchestrating 9/11, right? So where you see this lack of response and this lack of ability to respond, which would be the government doesn't have all power. For the 9/11 conspiracy theorists, this for them is the proof that the government orchestrated it. So it's an inversion of thinking, it's an inversion of realizing that the government doesn't have all the power to think that no, the fact that the government didn't respond actually shows us that the government does have the power and they chose not to.
Mm,
So that's one of the various case studies of conspiracy that I engage with.
mhm.
Another one is the moon landing and stuff with like banking conspiracies and things like that. So
So, okay, now that you explain what conspiracy is, here you took the position of a impartial reader simply
yeah.
explaining. But what is your personal take on conspiracy? Is it legitimate? Because
Hmm.
today we tend to see conspiracy theory as a bad thing. Oh,
Yeah.
when you don't buy what the media is saying, say, oh, it's a conspiracy theories. But we say it in a very dismissive way.
Hmm.
What is your personal take on it? I mean, let's put the explainer, the professor aside. What is
Hmm.
Hunter's
Yeah.
approach to conspiracy?
Yeah. I think that there are definitely some true conspiracies, and I think
Mhm.
that MK Ultra is one of the ones I mention in my book as like an example of a conspiracy theory. The CIA is mind controlling people. Like what? And then it turns out to be true. They're mind controlling, they're using LSD. Um, and so that's a true conspiracy. And so I think that there have been conspiracies proven true in history. And so I think that dismissing conspiracy theories altogether is a bit silly. Um, I don't know if I have any specific conspiracy theories that I personally believe in. I could name off the top of my head, but I'm always a bit of a skeptic to everything.
Mhm.
And so when it comes to like an official narrative of anything,
Mhm.
I okay, yeah, yeah. When it comes to the official, I was trying to think of one, but no,
Yeah.
no, that's not really a conspiracy theory. I was like, that's maybe one, but no. it deals with like various elections held throughout history and stuff that some people say are rigged, and I'm like, I don't think they are, but
And
um
so in the book, what is your
mhm,
favorite chapter? Like when you know, every
yeah.
author, even in your own book, there's one chapter that you specifically like over the others. What is your favorite chapter in Conspiracy and the Subject?
Yeah, my favorite chapter is, I'd say, the first chapter, because what I do in the first chapter is it is the most about conspiracies particularly. A lot of the other chapters go into other things that kind of revolve around conspiracy and tie it back in, but this chapter is all about conspiracies and the function of them and the spread of them and the structure of them. And I think that it is where the reason why it's the first chapter is because it is the most understandable, I would say, for
Yeah.
someone that hasn't read Lacan. Because what I do is I explain each term in sort of a dictionary format, kind of,
Yeah.
where I want the reader to be able to understand what I'm talking about. And then in the later part of the later part of the book, I use those terms, but I don't have to explain them because if you have trouble understanding what I'm saying, go back to the first chapter.
Yeah.
There's the understanding. And so the first chapter is my favorite, I'd say.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very methodical, uh,
Yeah.
pedagogical, and everything. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now I'm interested in your interest in philosophy.
Hmm.
What drove you to philosophy in the first place?
Yeah. So I was one of the unfortunate students to be going through junior year of high school when COVID hit. And so I didn't have a senior year at all. I did not go to school senior year. I was fully online. Um, so I was, was playing video games and stuff like that, and I just kind of got bored. And I've always been very interested in reading. One of the
Yeah.
things I did when I was in high school, when I was 17, was I compiled a very extensive, I guess I'd call it like a dossier
Hmm.
of resources and studies on systemic racism
Interesting.
and and argued against it. I didn't think it exists, and I'm still probably the argument I made was I said that if you want to argue systemic racism exists, the most likely contender would be in the jury selection process and in the death sentence process,
Yeah.
which I think I still definitely hold to that today.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But I didn't think police I didn't think you could establish police brutality as a genuine factor and all that. But so yeah, I
Yeah.
was been very methodically and research based since I've been like 15 or 16. But when senior year of high school hit, I started to really get into reading. And I think the first text that I read, you're not gonna like this one. I think it was the Communist Manifesto. I'm pretty sure.
No, honestly, I have no problem with, people are entitled to
Yeah,
their
yeah.
opinion, whatever they want to read, like to me, like I honestly respect, like whatever your
Hmm.
political leanings are. I honestly respect your intellect. You're an extremely intelligent person. You can argue. I read your stuff online. It's just that I'm like, okay, Hunter, I don't have time to get into this, but you can definitely argue, and you're very rigorous in the process of your argument. And as an intellectual, that's where the essence of your work lies. It's
Mhm.
being rigorous in your
Yeah,
approach. And I honestly admire and appreciate that. Now we
yeah,
can argue against the Communist Manifesto all day if we
yeah,
want. But I think it's even good to be exposed to it
yeah,
so that you understand. Because I think like when you disagree with something, it's important to understand the thing you disagree with
definitely.
so that you can explain to the person the entire premise of what they support and then say, here is the flaw.
Hmm.
Then now you put your argument on the table.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the Communist Manifesto is one of the best books to read when you want to be exposed to politics,
Hmm.
to politics and to politics, history, and political economy.
Yeah.
And then now, whether you agree with it or not, that's a different story.
Yeah. Yeah. So I started with that, and
Mhm.
from there it was kind of just like getting into sort of that like strand. Like I read some Lenin, I read Little Trotsky. I mostly stuck with like the political economy of like the 19th century. I read some Ricardo's not 19th, he's 18th, right? Or
David Ricardo, early 19th
early
century, I
time.
would say.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So I
early
read some
19th.
Ricardo. I kind of stayed in that economics vein for a bit,
Yeah,
but I always liked the philosophy of it. When Marx would talk about like these philosophical terms, I
yeah,
would want to know what he was talking about.
yeah.
And so I made a really bad decision to just kind of search up like popular philosophy. Not really popular, but more like well-regarded books of philosophy in academia. And I started with, I don't have the book with me actually. No, I don't. It was a book by a French philosopher named Jean Baudrillard.
Hmm.
It was it's called The System of Objects. And I read that book and I had absolutely no idea what I read. Because it was just, it was incomprehensible French, mumble gumbling,
Yeah.
and I used Baudrillard a lot in my book. I referenced that book a couple of times actually too,
Mhm.
but now I go back and I know what it's saying. But I think what I differ from a lot of people in this way is that when I didn't understand what he was saying, I didn't say, "Oh, this book isn't for me. Philosophy isn't for me. I'm going to go do something else." What I said was, "I want to understand what he's saying."
Yeah.
So what I did was I looked at who he's talking about, and that led me to Freud and psychoanalysis. And that's when I started reading psychoanalysis because
Mm.
I wanted to understand Baudrillard. And then at that point, I was like, "Oh, well." I can read psychoanalysis. I can understand this guy, but hey, I kind of like psychoanalysis more. So I'm going to put aside this guy much
Mhm.
and kind of focus on psychoanalysis. And from that, also, psychoanalysis took me to kind of the same thing. I was reading Freud and he was mentioning these German philosophers, and I didn't know who they were. Instead of being like, I guess this isn't for me, I said, I'm going to go figure out who they are, read them, and then read Freud. So I did the same thing. I read those philosophers, came back, read Freud, and
Mhm.
so that's kind of how my writing works. That's kind of how I think is I'm always like if I don't understand something, I don't just put it away. I try and figure out what can I do to understand it. And I've
That
never
makes
had
sense.
something where that process hasn't worked. I've never met a text that I haven't understood, but after doing that,
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I honestly admire your approach because then that's what many people
Hmm.
they do something. It's the same with doing things in life. You try, it
Yeah.
doesn't work, I give up.
Hmm.
It's the same thing. So yeah, like you don't understand something, you're like, I need to figure it out. I need
Yeah.
to, it's not rocket science. There's a way to understand what he's talking about. So so does that mean you're aiming to go for a PhD at some point? I would
Yeah.
assume
Yeah. I'm gonna go for a PhD in theology.
in theology.
Yeah.
Why theology? Why not philosophy instead?
I find that I can do more with theology, and the philosophy programs I would look into would be kind of like wary about theology invading philosophy. But I find that theology programs tend to be pretty open about philosophy
Okay.
being in theology. And so I find that I can do both rather than being like pushed into one camp I don't want to be pushed in.
Okay. And I would assume the goal of the PhD is to become a professor, or you have
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
job
That's the goal.
prospect. Professor.
That's yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. That's I remember at some point I thought about that too, like do a PhD, becoming a professor, and I was I don't know if I want to go back to school again because I graduated in I got my master's in political management in 2016.
Mhm.
So I was out of school for a while, and I was like, you gotta look out for professors again and ask them to write a letter of recommendation. And
It's hard when you haven't been in school for a while and you're
yeah,
like, I don't really remember you.
yeah, I'm like, you know what? Like, I know how to write. I enjoy publishing books. Why
Mhm.
not start my own company,
Yeah.
man? So that's how I end up doing GGV publishing. I think it's just one of the best decisions I ever made.
Yeah.
Um, Hunter, why don't you tell me a little bit about your writing process?
Mhm.
So, how do you start with? I'm sure like you have an idea in mind. How do you decide on the topic, the title, and do you write an outline once you've decided on these two?
No, I don't ever write outlines. I find them complete waste of time.
Really?
A complete waste of time.
Why is that?
I don't think that way. I don't think ahead like that. I think in the
Mhm.
moment for me. And so
Interesting.
when I'm writing, thoughts will just be fire millions of thoughts are firing in my brain. And I have to jot them down as fast as possible. And
Interesting.
yeah, so that's how I wrote this book. This book, well, So I started, yeah, so Conspiracy in the Subject was meant to be a 30-page essay. And I got to 30 pages and I was like, I want to write more. Let's do 50 pages. And the 50 pages, I was like, well, I'm not going to do 100 pages and not make it a book. So
Yeah.
that became a book. But there's a saying from Nietzsche. Nietzsche said in his Untimely Meditations that he will never read an author who starts writing with the purpose of it becoming a book. And I take that to heart. I think that you
Mm.
should start writing, your thoughts should start firing, and if it becomes a book, so be it. But if it just remains an essay, that's fine too. Um, I will say that as I've now written a book, I now write essays and I can kind of gauge like if I want this to be a book.
Mhm.
But the book I'm working on right now, that also was an essay that became a book. So
Mhm.
I've held true to that. But yeah, no, I think for me outlines don't work. For some people they do, but I'm just my brain doesn't work that way. And I just start writing and yeah, I just start writing and I have like books piled up next to me that I think I need maybe, and I just kind of reference them as I go. And I do a lot of editing in time. Like I don't I spend a lot of time after I write a sentence. I will go back and edit it like 50 times before I, move on to the next
Yeah.
sentence, which is very time consuming, but
Very.
I just really don't like leaving unfinished sentences there because then I forget what I wanted to change in the sentence in the future. Um, so I do editing in real time, and yeah, so that's and but I would say I won't say that there's no like planning. Um, I think the first part of this book that I wrote was part of the first chapter before I even had my definition of conspiracy that I then, followed with. So I kind of started writing about conspiracy. Um, and then I started to be like, well, I need to find a definition of conspiracy.
Mhm.
So I perused the internet. I found Britannica and encyclopedia.com. And I was like, I like these definitions. And I talk about them in my introduction. I say, I mention the two definitions and I say, I like this from this and this from this. And I synthesize it with my own, right? And that's kind of when the whole book came together, is that
Mhm.
moment when I got that definition and I said, oh, okay, now it's time to go through Lacan's work and plug my definition in and then look at various political events, contemporary events, and plug my definition in.
Mhm.
And the book just kind of built itself at that point.
Got it.
Um, yeah, yeah.
That's very interesting because I have a completely different approach from you when it comes to that. No,
Mhm,
but and that's what makes the beauty of writing because in my opinion, it's just my opinion. In my opinion, you are part of the minority of
mhm,
writers. Let me explain what I mean by minority. You know, a lot of people they always want to write books and they start and they never finish it
mhm,
because there's a lack of commitment, especially there's a lack of organization due to that commitment. You know, they're
mhm,
not organized. And I've always advocate for the outline. You know, the outline is like a business plan. You remind
mhm.
me of like a businessman who start a business without a business plan.
Yeah.
But and it works. Don't get me wrong. For
Mhm,
some people, it does work
yeah.
because at the end of the day, you publish a book that was first of all very well written, very well organized, very logical, coherent. The book, in terms of quality, was flawless.
Mhm.
For someone who didn't write an outline, honestly, that's what I'm saying. You're part of the minority.
Yeah.
Because for most people, you know, most people, I think that they need guidance, and
Mhm.
the outline is it's sort of that living document,
Yeah.
you know, that you can refer to if you want to keep track
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
I will say that as the book started to come along, I
Yeah,
did start like saying, okay, here's a chapter here,
yeah,
and I'm talking about this here.
yeah,
But that was like well into the writing process. I
yeah,
would say maybe definitely, I definitely planned out the fourth chapter
yeah,
before I wrote it, definitely, because I
yeah,
said, oh, I want to talk about QAnon, but I want to spend a whole chapter on this.
yeah,
And so I made a couple of points about QAnon and how I can tie this into what I worked on earlier. So I would
yeah.
say that that chapter was definitely outlined. And I would say maybe parts of chapter three, but definitely not one and definitely not two.
Got
Yeah.
it.
So,
Yeah, I'm a big planner. Like
okay.
I write the entire outline.
Wow.
I write the abstract for every single book. I've written 27 books, every single one of them. I
Hmm.
always write the outline. So I start with the abstract, like maybe a paragraph, maybe two paragraphs. Then I'm like, okay, chapter one, I'm going to talk about this, chapter two, but as you start, you get really inspired and sometimes you can deviate.
Oh
It
yeah.
happens. Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
Do you have a writing schedule when you write? Because first of all, before you answer this question, have you ever encountered or experienced writer's block while you were writing your book?
Yeah, I would say I had. I took a week off from writing. I took 1 week off.
Okay.
And during that week, I just didn't want to think about anything to do with psychoanalysis, Lacan, or anything. Unfortunately, I'm still in school, so I couldn't, not do anything. I had to
Yeah.
still do my schoolwork, but
Yes. Cool.
I took myself completely out of that environment. And I think it really helped because I was dealing with a little bit of writer's block, probably concerning um maybe around like yeah, it's around there, yeah. Like the middle of chapter two,
Yeah.
I had an idea about where I wanted to go, but I wasn't entirely sure with how to get there. And so I kind of just like sat on it for a few days, which
Mm.
is something I didn't do any other part of the book. I
Yeah.
just start writing and what happens happens. But yeah, no, I definitely like I had a bit of writer's block, I would say, for a couple of days, and I took a week off and I said, that's it. No, not thinking about any of this. I came
So,
back and I was like,
yeah.
good. I
So
was on
okay,
the ball.
so your way to overcome it was to basically not think about it, basically take some space from it, and
Hmm.
then come back with a fresh mind, and then okay. So,
Yeah.
but you never develop like a writing schedule when you say, for example, oh, I will write every Monday, every Wednesday, every Friday, every Sunday from let's say 9 p.m. to 11 p.m.,
Hmm.
something like that.
Yeah, so I write in the morning. Most of
Interesting.
this book was written between the hours of 9 a.m. and 1 p.m., I'd say.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I usually write at
Um,
night.
no. And then maybe some late nights too, like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those are the
Those
hours
are
when, like, yeah.
the you get your mind turning. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
That's
I
when, like, you're like, oh
definitely
my God, I'm cranking this up.
later in the book, I think
Mhm.
chapter four, a lot of it was written at 3 a.m., which
Right.
yeah, I was rolling then. Because you already
And
have everything. You have all the ideas and you just got to
yeah.
pick them in. Yeah. But yeah, it's the same thing with my book right now that I'm
Mhm.
working on is it's I'd say most of it's written around like 10 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I don't have a schedule because of schoolwork. I
Yeah.
really have to just kind of, do the schoolwork, whatever, and then I tend to do this first and then do the schoolwork.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah. It
That
matters more
makes
to me,
sense.
so yeah.
And
Um,
my last question
yeah.
regarding the writing your writing process is, do you do the research before you start writing, or you do the research as you write?
As I write.
Yeah, I'm
Always
I'm
as I
I'm
write.
very much the same way on that one too.
Yeah. I have 20 tabs open on my second monitor right here. I have my writing monitor right here. I'm
Yep.
writing away.
Yep.
And yeah, that's how I do it. And
This is
I'm
awesome.
going in between tabs. I have books piled up on the side of
Yeah.
me. Yeah. Yeah.
This is awesome. Yeah, I'm the same way. I usually I start a little bit of research, but I start like doing extensive research once I start writing. Like, okay, I know my arguments,
Yeah.
and then I start, and then I'm like, I open a tab, and then I go on those uh JSTOR and for
Yep.
academic
Yep.
papers and stuff like that. Yeah,
Hmm.
and that's how I do. Well, that was very rewarding. That was
Yeah.
very interesting. Thank you, Hunter, for sharing your experience about writing, your aspirations to do a PhD in theology, and also continuing your philosophical work. And more importantly, I'm still amazed by the fact that you were able to write this book, Conspiracy and the Subject, because as I said, the subject in itself is convoluted. It's not
Yeah.
easy.
I have a funny story with about that.
Yeah.
I my school knows about my publication of my book and stuff, and
Yeah.
a couple of my professors, I've given them copies, and there was a visiting professor who knows a lot about Hegel who came to our school, and my professor, very excitedly was like, "Oh, our student wrote a book, and and about Lacan and all this," and the professor was like, "Oh, interesting," and so the professor said, and so my professor told me that he looked in the index and saw if I mentioned Hegel because he would only take me seriously if I mentioned Hegel, and I did
Right.
like 15 times, and so
Yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah,
was
this is awesome. This is
yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
Well, Hunter, thank you very much for coming on the GGV
yeah.
podcast. And we're looking forward for your second book, whenever it's ready, send it over and we'll be happy to publish you.
Hmm.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys.